Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're tackling something quite fundamental, I think. It's about how we understand disability.
Yes, and it's sparked by this West Midlands Combined Authority report, Making the West Midlands an Exemplary Region for Disabled People 2024.
Exactly that one.
Right.
And it really brings up this whole discussion around language, specifically why you hear disabled person more now instead of, say, person with a disability.
And that preference is deeply rooted in what's called the social model of disability.
Right. Now, on the surface, that might just seem like, a small wording change,
It seems like it, yeah.
but it actually points to a really big difference in perspective. So our goal today is to dig into that.
Using the social model as our guide.
Yeah, exactly. We want to clarify that distinction, the difference between impairment and disability.
And hopefully do it in a way that makes sense quickly without getting bogged down in jargon.
Right.
For those listeners looking for that clarity.
We're aiming for those aha moments, if you like.
Okay, so let's start with the basics. The WMCA report defines impairment. How does it put it?
It says an impairment is a physical, sensory, or mental difference or condition.
Right. And the key thing there is that it's seen as a characteristics of the individual, something inherent.
Yeah, like having impaired vision or a mobility issue. That's the impairment.
But, and this is the crucial bit, the social model, which the WMCA supports, says that the impairment itself isn't what disables the person.
Okay, so if the impairment isn't the cause of disability, what is?
Well, the model argues it's society. It's the environment. It's the barriers we create that actually lead to someone being disabled.
That's a major shift in thinking, isn't it? From focusing on the individual's condition to focusing on the external world.
It really is. It flips the script. It came out of disability rights movements, pushing back against the idea that disability was purely a medical issue residing within the person.
Okay, let's make this concrete. Because talking about barriers can sound a bit abstract. What sort of things are we actually discussing here? Examples from the report.
Definitely. The report gives clear examples. First, think physical barriers, buildings without ramps or lifts.
Right. And they mentioned that statistics 79% of homes in the West Midlands were built before accessibility standards even existed.
Exactly, 79%. That immediately tells you there's a massive built-in problem for many people.
And transport, too.
Yeah, transport is huge. The report notes that while the WMCA area has done relatively well, with 87% of its stations step-free.
That sounds pretty good.
It is, compared to the national picture. Nationally, over 40% of British rail stations don't have step-free access from the street to the platform. Over 40%.
Wow. So just getting on a train becomes impossible for some? That's a clear barrier created by infrastructure.
Absolutely. Then you've got environmental barriers. Things like uneven pavements, clutter on walkways, bins, A-boards, parked cars, things disabled people constantly raise as problems.
Things many of us might not even notice, but they actively block someone else's way.
Precisely. And then there are the less visible barriers, psychological ones, attitudinal barriers.
Like prejudice,
Yeah.
assumptions.
Yes. Negative attitudes, discrimination. The report includes a quote from someone feeling judged on the bus just for being there. That kind of thing creates a barrier just as real as a flight of stairs.
That really hits home. It's not just about physical stuff.
No, not at all. And there are systemic barriers, too. Like the report mentions disabled parents or carers struggling because information isn't provided in accessible formats.
So if you can't get the information you need to support your child, the system itself is disabling you in your role as a parent.
Exactly. The system has failed to account for your needs.
Okay, so let's flip this. If we start removing these barriers, put in ramps, make information accessible, challenge those negative attitudes, what happens then, according to the social model?
Well, this is the really powerful implication. If you remove the barrier, the person with the impairment may no longer be disabled in that context.
So the wheelchair user can enter the building because there's a ramp.
Right. Or the visually impaired parent gets the school newsletter in Braille or audio so they can participate fully.
The impairment hasn't vanished, obviously.
Yeah, the impairment is still there. That's crucial. But the disability, the restriction caused by the inaccessible environment or system has been removed or reduced.
So the disability was situational, created by the barrier.
Yes. It really makes you question how often we attribute limitations to the individual when it's actually the environment failing them.
Okay, this brings us right back to the language. Disabled person. Why is that term preferred within this model?
Because disabled person puts the focus squarely on the disabling process. It highlights that disability is something done to people by society, by these barriers we've just discussed.
It emphasizes the social cause.
Exactly. It implies a need for societal change, for barrier removal. It frames disability as a social justice issue.
And the alternative, person with a disability, what's the concern there, even if it's well-intentioned?
The intention is usually positive person-first language, right? Putting the person before the label.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But from the social model perspective, it can unintentionally suggest that the disability is an intrinsic part of the person, like carrying something around with them.
Ah, I see. It risks locating the problem back within the individual rather than in society's structures.
Potentially, yes.
Yeah.
It can subtly obscure the role of those external barriers and the need to dismantle them. That's the argument.
So it's a very deliberate choice to say disabled person to keep the focus on what society needs to do.
Correct. It's political, in a sense. It asserts that disability is created by society.
Okay, so let's be crystal clear. Even if we achieved a perfectly accessible world with no barriers,
And a person would still have their impairment. The underlying condition or difference remains.
but they wouldn't be disabled by society in the same way.
Precisely. They could participate much more fully. The impairment is the characteristic. The disability is the restriction imposed by society. That's the core distinction.
And this whole understanding must underpin the WMCA's big goals for the region.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
When they talk about making the West Midlands exemplary, it's about tackling those barriers in housing, jobs, transport. It's practical application of the social model.
They even connect it to the economy, don't they?
They do. They mention the potential economic upside, a 23 billion pound boost to UK GDP by 2030 if employment rates for disabled people increased significantly.
So inclusion isn't just the right thing to do, it's economically smart too.
That's the argument they're making. It reframes inclusion not just as a cost, but as an investment with returns for everyone.
And are they putting things in place? Is it just talk?
Well, the report points to concrete actions, like their accessible housing program and ongoing work to improve transport accessibility. It shows they're trying to translate the principle into practice.
Okay, so let's wrap this up. If we boil it down, what are the key things for you, the listener, to take away from this?
I'd say three main things. One, impairment is about an individual's physical, sensory, or mental difference. Two, disability is created by societal barriers. Physical, attitudinal, systemic. It's not inherent in the impairment itself.
And three.
Three, using disabled person reflects this social understanding. It emphasizes that society has a responsibility to remove those barriers and create inclusion.
Right. So here's something to think about as you go about your day. Look around at the places you go, the things you use. How many barriers might be there that you just don't see because they don't affect you?
Subtle things, maybe, or really obvious ones.
Yeah, and consider this. What small changes, either in how we think or in the physical world around us, could actually remove one of those barriers and unlock someone's potential? How can we collectively build that truly inclusive society? Makes you think, doesn't it?